Today's video is sponsored by Blinkist. If, like me, you found yourself wanting to read more books and learn more, but just can't find the time, you should really check out Blinkist, the digital learning app that takes the world's best-selling non-fiction books and distills their key insights into powerful, 15-minute, made-for-mobile packs. Every title can be enjoyed in either text or audio form, and they're all hand-selected, condensed and recorded by real people who are as passionate about learning as you are. You can switch between audio and text versions of books whenever you like to fit your mood or activity, and with apps for iOS, Android, the web, and even a Send to Kindle feature, you really can take Blinkist anywhere and learn in a way that suits you. Based on your interests and user history, Blinkist provides you with personalized reading recommendations and expert curated lists, meaning you'll always know what to read next. Dive into thousands of titles across 27 categories, from philosophy to psychology, and health and nutrition to personal growth. 2 books I recommend you check out on Blinkist are The Story Factor, which explains how powerful narratives can be and unravels the art of storytelling, and The 5 AM Club, which shows how embracing a revolutionary morning routine can deliver epic results and improve your life. The first 100 people to go to Blinkist.com/lazymasquerade are going to get unlimited access to Blinkist for 1 week. That 7-day trial is completely free, and you can cancel at any time during that period. You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership. Find that link in the description box below. Stay curious, and become the best you yet with Blinkist. Our planned camping spot for the night was full. We'd backpacked all day to get to that location, and there wasn't anywhere close to set up our tents. We called our guy on the outside to come and pick us up, as it was getting late, we didn't have anywhere to set up camp, and a storm was approaching. We hiked to the nearest exit point on the trail, met our pickup guy, and he drove us a few miles to the nearest campsite we were familiar with, and that we could basically drive up to. It was a long logging path, pretty deep in the mountains, that we had all hiked in the previous years, so we were kind of familiar with the area. Anyways, we hop out the van, and it's pitch black outside. No moon. It's April in the mountains, and still pretty chilly. We're cold, hungry, and exhausted. That's when we notice a man staring at us from behind a tree. I know this sounds like a no-sleep story, but it's 100% true, and probably the most scared I've ever been. We notice this guy. No headlamp, no equipment, no backpack. He's just standing there. One of our group, a former Marine, yells at him to come out and explain what his deal is. This guy walks a few feet out from behind the tree, and we all shine our lights on him. And I kid you not, this dude's white t-shirt is covered in what looks like blood smears. He's pretty rough looking. Long hair, long beard, crazy eyes, and he was wearing a red-smeared t-shirt and shorts in 1-degree weather at night. We're all pretty freaked out, and this is an experienced hiking group who've all seen some stuff. We ask this guy what his deal is, and he simply says, "We can't camp here." Well, we tell him that's exactly what we plan to do, and he says, "I don't think that's a good idea for any of you." We kind of turn to discuss as a group, and when we look back, he's hidden back behind the tree. As a group, we basically decide none of us are getting any sleep that night if we stay there, so we pack up the van and leave. As we were pulling out, this guy pulled out one of those red-filtered flashlights and ran after our van. I'm not kidding, he followed us for at least a quarter mile on foot. He was fast as all hell. We passed a park ranger on the road and flagged him down to tell him how weird this dude was acting. He said he'd go and investigate. I didn't hear anything else about it for 5 years. For the longest time, I thought he was probably a moonshiner who was just living in the woods and didn't want us near his still. People hunt out there all the time, which could maybe explain the blood smears a little bit. But I was recently at an event with some of those guys again for the first time in years, and that creepy dude from the woods got brought up in conversation. One of them, who still lives nearby, brought out his phone and said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you guys. I saw him again." He pulls up a news article, and there he was, so obviously the same guy. He'd been arrested for murdering some poor girl on that trail. Timelines didn't match up, so I fully believe we saw this guy shortly after he'd murdered someone else. He hasn't been charged with anything else as far as I'm aware. I'm not backpacking without a gun anymore. I was dating this guy for about 2 months. It was just another Friday night. I ordered a pizza and went into his bedroom to watch TV while I waited for it. He was on his laptop in the dining area. He started acting odd, kept saying that he wanted to cage fight my ex-husband who he had never met. I remember getting and paying for the pizza. Then he asks me, "What did you do that for?" I had no idea what he was talking about. He proceeds to attack me. He pins me to the ground and begins choking me. Well, I was sure he was going to kill me. I managed to reach up between his legs and grabbed and twisted as hard as I could. He rolled me over, bit my shoulder, then let me go. I still have the scar from that bite. I ran to his bedroom looking for my phone. This was back before most phones had screen locks, but I was in such a panic I didn't realize I could call for help with his phone. I made the mistake of telling him I was calling the cops, but still hadn't found my phone yet. He struggled with me, then stopped and went into his closet. I managed to find my phone by that point, but didn't get a chance to call. He came out with my ex-husband's gun that he had stolen from my house. He struggled with me on the bed. I thought for sure I was dead at that point. Then he abruptly gets up and stands at the foot of the bed. 1 second he's standing there. The next, he's gone. Apparently, I totally blocked out the part where he put a round through his head. I finally managed to call 911, but I didn't know his address. The cops finally showed up, but he was already dead by then. He was a bodybuilder. Turns out, he bought some illegal roids off the internet. The presumption was he either took too many or had a bad reaction that caused him to flip out. I haven't thought about that whole incident for a long time. This happened 14 years ago, and retelling it has had an effect that I didn't know was still there. I was home alone one evening, since my wife was working late. She's a doctor at a local hospital, and late nights are a common occurrence. I'd recently been working on my baking skills, and thought I'd surprise her by baking her an apple pie for when she got home. I took it out of the oven and set it on the kitchen counter to rest, then went into the living room to watch TV and wait for my wife. We live in a safe neighborhood, so I had left the back door unlocked for her. That way, she could get in through the house's side gate and enter directly into the kitchen. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard her come in through the back door. I shouted a hello from the comfort of the living room. Weird thing was, she didn't shout hi back. I heard her moving about in the kitchen, and yelled for her to take some pie if she wanted some, but she still didn't say a word back to me, or even come in to say hi. Must have been a hard night or something. After a few minutes, the show ends, and I get up and walk into the kitchen to see what she's doing. She's not there. I look at the pie on the counter and see that a single slice has been cut out. She obviously hadn't taken a plate, because there were crumbs all over the floor, leading into the adjoining dining room. She must have gone in there to eat at the table. But the lights were off, and the dining room was pitch black. I asked if she was in there, but again, didn't get anything back. Maybe she'd gone upstairs and I hadn't heard her? I decided to go up and check, but first went to cut myself a slice of the pie I'd made, now it had cooled down. I reach for the knife, but that's when I realize it's missing. The large carving blade we keep in the block on the counter. It was gone. I get a weird feeling that something isn't right, and turn back to look into the pitch-black dining room. I stare into the blackness, focusing my eyes, and in the black, I can make out a sort of outline right at the back of the room, like I could see something, but couldn't at the same time. A black figure in a black space. It wasn't moving, and there weren't any sounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in there, and that it was looking right at me. I was too scared to turn on the dining room light or get any closer to the possible figure in the shadows. So, in a frozen state of panic, I took my phone out of my pocket, planning to keep my distance, turn on the flashlight, and shine it into the room. As my thumb ran over the screen, I saw that I had a message. It was from my wife, sent 10 minutes ago. "Hey, busy night. I won't be home for a couple of hours. Don't wait up." I looked at the still motionless figure in the darkness. The outline was clearer now, and I realized it was because it had gotten closer. This wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. Someone really was there, and whoever it wasn't my wife. I turned on the flashlight and shone it directly into the dining room. There was someone standing there. It was a man. The light illuminated him, and he lifted one of his hands to shield his eyes. The light glinted off the blade in his other hand. I realized he was in mid-step and moving towards me. I almost dropped my phone out of fear, but instead managed to make a beeline for the back door. I ran outside and got a safe distance from the house. Not hearing any footsteps behind me, I turned back to look. The man was standing on the perimeter of my property, staring at me with wide eyes, the kitchen blade still in his hand. I continued to put distance between myself and him, all the while calling the authorities. When they finally arrived, they found the man inside my house, still clenching the blade. Turns out, this guy was one of my wife's patients. He had some serious issues, had stopped taking his meds, and was going through an episode when he snuck into our home. He thought it was my wife home alone that night. When asked what he was planning on doing, he remained silent. I looked on as they took him away. His eyes were still bulging, but otherwise, his face was blank and expressionless. Last I heard, he'd been committed to a psych ward. I hope he gets the help he needs, and I really hope he doesn't try and pay us a visit if he ever gets out. I don't know exactly what his plan was that night, but I know it involved my wife, and you can best believe we don't keep our door unlocked anymore. I'm just thankful that it really wasn't my wife home alone that night. Who knows what might have happened? This was maybe 20 years ago, in Manila, Philippines. There was a dead body on the side of the street, with a sign around its neck, saying, "I'm a cell phone thief. Don't be like me." I was 17, coming home from my girlfriend's house at around 3 or 4 in the AM. I live in an apartment and would regularly jump my backyard fence, climb up the second floor, and come down the stairs to climb through my window on the first floor. Didn't want to wake the parents. I get to the fence, hear a car screeching its tires. I get to the top of the fence, and as I turn back to land, I hear footsteps running towards where I am. I'm caught off guard, because no one should be back there at that time. I land and turn around to see who it is. It's a neighbor who lives in the building, a 32-year-old gangster cholo and frequent substance user. I felt relief because we were on decent terms, and he knew who I was growing up. But then I notice the Uzi in his hand. He half points it at me, shaking as he does so. I nearly crap myself, but he lowers it, realizing who I am. I say, "Hey, what's up?" He was obviously on something. I could tell by the way he was talking. He asked me to hold his gun so he could go and take a piss, pushing it into my chest as he did so. I could feel him shaking from adrenaline, or whatever he was wired on. I look at it, and it's just cold, hard steel in the shape of a gun. It looked like death. I felt like I didn't have a choice. I was stuck for a second, but I managed to take a step back, raise my hands, and say, "Nah bro, I can't." He says it's all good. Use your shirt to hold it just real quick while I take a piss. I repeat, "Nah, I can't. Put it on the floor and do what you gotta do. I'll keep watch." He proceeds to take a leak, turning my way every other second because his loaded gun is on the floor between us. I look the other way, trying not to make him any more nervous. I look into the sky and hear a helicopter approaching. It's low, and its searchlight is scanning the area. I tell him, "Yo, I gotta go." He asks if I have keys to the backyard door. I nervously pull them out and say, "Yeah, I do, but let's go though." I hurriedly run to the door and open it for us. He lives on the first floor as well, and we go our opposite ways. a huge relief. I have to jump through my window still. I can barely manage to get the screen off because I'm shaking so much. 10 seconds later, I'm in, and nervous from what's just happened. I wash my face, change my clothes, get ready for bed. I put Adult Swim on to try and relax and drift off to sleep. 20 minutes later, as I'm drifting off, I see a red laser being pointed through my curtains. I nearly shat myself, as my bed was visible through the curtains, and the dot seemed like it was shaky and searching. My only thought was that my neighbor had gone and got more high, thought about what had happened, and decided I'd seen too much. I'm literally hugging my wall, standing on my bed to avoid the laser beam. I thought I was dead. Then the red light shuts off and flicks on and off a couple of times, and I notice the angle isn't floor level. It's coming from the second floor. A neighbor girl I used to talk to had 2 younger sisters, and their window was across from mine, but on the second floor. Most likely, they saw me jumping in through the window and decided it was a good idea that night to shine a laser beam into my room. I was furious and sent her sister a few texts, blowing up about them shining the laser into my room that late at night. She understood without me having to explain, and they stopped immediately. But damn, the thoughts that were running through my head. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry about the situation. This next story is narrated by my friend, Sound Fiction. He's new on YouTube and an excellent storyteller, so make sure to check out his channel via the link in the description box after this video.
I used to work night shifts at a convenience store that stayed open until 3 a.m. The place was in the middle of nowhere, which was great for me because after 11 p.m. there were rarely any customers. Even before 11, things were usually quiet. Some shifts went by without a single person stepping foot inside the store. That basically meant I could treat work like paid personal time. I'd often play music and zone out behind the counter, or finish up some college assignments that were due. I only worked there twice a week, so staying up into the early hours wasn't a big deal. Most college students stay up half the night on weekends anyway, right? The store had 2 security cameras on the ceiling, one positioned behind the counter, which basically covered half the store, and a camera at the back that covered the other half. We could keep an eye on things from the back office, where the monitor was located. Well, one night, I was working the night shift alone, as per usual. It was just after 3 in the morning, closing time. I was counting some money in the back office when I got this weird feeling that something was off, and I looked up toward the CCTV monitor. There was a man standing in the middle of the store. Big guy by the looks of it. Very tall, but otherwise normal looking. Strange thing was, he was staring directly into the overhead camera, and he wasn't moving an inch, like a stiff piece of cardboard, not looking around or approaching the counter or anything. Strangely, I hadn't heard the bell at the entrance go off either. It automatically chimed whenever anyone comes into the store. Thinking I must have just not heard it, I walked out to tell the guy we were closed. But when I got to the counter, there was nobody there. Only one door separates the back office from the store, so it's not like he could have run anywhere in the few seconds it took for me to move between rooms. I went to check the store entrance, which I'd already locked. Yep, still locked. Nobody outside either. I went back into the office to make sure the camera was working properly. Sure enough, the feed was live and operating normally. I figured it must have been a glitch. Some old footage probably got cut into the feed somehow. I'm no technical whiz kid, so I thought that explained it. Then I got back to counting the money. Maybe a minute passed, when my eyes were again drawn to something on the monitor. My heart nearly sank into my stomach when I saw the same tall man on the screen, now standing at the back of the store, pressed up against the fridge, arms at his sides, his back turned to the camera. I grabbed one of the metal poles we used to unhook ceiling latches and opened the door to the main store. "Hello?" I shouted out. "I'm sorry, but we're closed." No reply. I looked up and down each aisle in turn, but saw nobody. The man was nowhere to be found, and with the entrance locked, there was nowhere for him to have gone. I bolted back into the safety of the office. As soon as I'd locked the door behind me, I looked at the monitor, and there he was, pressed up close against the office door that I just ran through, staring through the small window. My eyes darted to that window in the door, and there was nobody there. No face or anything. But there he was on the live footage, clear as day. I grabbed my bag and scrambled out the back door of the office that led into the parking lot. After locking the back door, I got into my car and drove a few minutes before pulling over. I toyed with the idea of calling the cops, but instead called up my boss to tell him someone was in the store, knowing he'd be annoyed that I woke him up, but not knowing what else to do. He was sort of a big brother figure to me, a mentor, the kind of guy who had a tough start in life and wasn't afraid of anything. I at least knew he'd help me out. My boss groggily answered his phone, and I told him the situation. He asked me what the guy looked like, and I described him as best as I could.
"I know the guy you're talking about. And yeah, he scares me too."
My boss came down to the store about a half hour later, and we went back in together to finish counting the money and to take a look around. We checked the video from that night, but there was no trace of the man in the footage. My boss didn't call me crazy or get angry at me for wasting his time, though. He seemed to understand completely.
"Thought I was the only one who saw him,"
he said to me.
"But if I told you before, would you have believed me?"
According to my boss, he'd seen a large man on the monitor about 3 times over 2 years, who vanished whenever he went to look at him in person. He just said I got unlucky that shift. I want to chalk this experience up to me hallucinating, or my mind playing tricks on me in the early hours. But the fact my boss said he'd seen the same figure, well, either he was screwing with me and swapped out the footage, or there really was something unexplainable going on in the store. Thing is, my boss wasn't one for screwing around. From then on, we always had at least 2 people working the night shifts. But I didn't stay working there for long after that.
This happened a few years ago, a couple of weeks before Christmas. My husband works for a finance company, and every year they throw a big Christmas party for all of the employees. Hubby isn't one for large social gatherings, but he felt obliged to turn up and stay for the whole event. That meant he wouldn't get home until after midnight. I honestly quite looked forward to those annual nights at home by myself. That night, just like all the years before, I ordered some takeout and binge-watched my favourite TV shows. Come 10 PM, I was already half asleep, and my husband had told me not to wait up for him, so I threw on my PJs, got into bed, and quickly fell asleep. I don't know what time it was, but I was awoken by my husband kissing me on the cheek, and then running his hands affectionately down my body. I was too tired to open my eyes, or even speak, so I just let out a groan to acknowledge his presence. As he kissed me, I noticed the unmistakable smell of whiskey on his breath. It was rare for him to drink, but it was Christmas after all. I heard him leave the bedroom and head back downstairs, then heard him rummaging around, probably making a nighttime snack or getting some work things organized. I didn't think much of it and fell back into a deep sleep. I was again awoken by my husband finally getting into bed and snuggling up beside me. The next morning when I woke up, I turned to my husband and asked him what time he got home. He said around 1:30 AM. I then asked him how many drinks he had had. He replied, "None." I laughed and called him a liar, said I smelled the whiskey on his breath last night when he came home. He said he'd maybe brought the smell of the party back on his clothes or something. I told him no, it was definitely on his breath when he kissed me. He said he hadn't kissed me. We checked downstairs. There was food missing from our fridge that neither I nor my husband had eaten, as well as a used plate on the table. Nothing of value had been taken, but a framed photo of me was missing from the living room. Police said there was no sign of a break-in. We have no idea how whoever this was got in the first place, but someone other than my husband had gotten inside during that small window of time I was alone and sleeping, and my husband was still out. How he knew to come at exactly that moment, I have no idea. We went to stay with my family until we found another place to move to. The blue ring octopus has a venom that causes paralysis, causing people to die of cardiac arrest or because of hypoxia. There's no antidote. The only cure is CPR, or life support, for the hour or so it takes for the venom to leave your body. There was a man who was bitten by a blue ring octopus. As the lifeguard was performing CPR, he was lying on his back on the beach, facing the sky, eyes frozen open. Unable to close his eyes or communicate with the others, he lied there as the sun slowly burnt out his retinas. He became permanently blind. I went onto the Verrückt water slide at the Schlitterbahn. If that sounds familiar, it was the tallest water slide in 2014, and was also the same water slide that a young boy died from decapitation. I went on this ride a month before the boy died. So the ride had a narrow raft that had 3 seats in a single row. I remember sitting at the back of the raft and looking for a seatbelt or safety harness, only to find out the only thing strapping you in was a Velcro strap that went over one shoulder. That was it. And as soon as it went down the first drop, the Velcro strap instantly came undone, and I started to feel myself lift out of my seat. It felt as if time moved slowly as I grabbed onto these loose, cheap nylon straps that were supposed to pass as handles, but they were so loose I ended up gripping onto the inner material of the raft as hard as I could, and agonized over the fact I had to go through another drop. The ride itself was less than a minute long, but it felt so much longer. Once we reached the bottom of the slide, I sat there, momentarily stunned about what had just happened, and the rest of my family that were waiting at the end of the slide came up to me and were shocked when they saw me still sitting in the raft, trembling, with tears streaming down my face. When I told my family what had happened, they informed the lifeguard that was monitoring at the bottom of the slide, and they said they would report and inspect the raft I'd been riding on. I was in shock the rest of the time we were at the water park, and didn't go on any of the other rides. I told as many people as I could about the lax safety precautions that the ride had. And then, a month later, I saw the incident with the death of the boy on the same ride, and instantly got chills. It sunk in that I really could have died the same way that poor boy did if I wouldn't have had a death grip on the sides of that raft. My mum always told us her dead twin sister follows her. Her sister died at a young age. I always called bull, because what's she wearing? How did she follow you from the Caribbean where she died? One day at work, my mum came to drop off my lunch that I forgot. After she dropped it off, she went to say hello to the guy playing music at the back. A customer she walked past stopped, turned, and went to kiss his knees and did the Holy Cross. I asked him if he's okay, and he stared at my mum and said, "A woman is following that lady over there." My stomach crunched because it was too random. A huge shout out to Sound Fiction. If you enjoyed his narration, please make sure to check out the description box below and go and visit his channel. Just before we end the video, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters: Thomas the Handsome, Alex Greensall, Azrael Warakai, Charlie Lackey, Connor Louthan, Crawford K. McDonald, Event Horizon Records, Gina Valera, Gracearchie, Infamous-senpapi, Leonardo Martinez, Mackenzie Griffin, Maria Mendez, Mira Lancaster, Monica Mendoza, Natalie Escobedo, Palmyra, Peter Lolgeraj, Philip Westra, Procupidine Natter, Ronnie Franklin, Silas Geist, Sloane Crawford, Taylor&Monica Gruenk, The Only Dorita, Zane, Ms. Crypto, Damien Bennett, Hungry and Hammered, The Deck of Cards, TNS Mum, Hamish K, The Nuongoem 24, Bomu38, and Lydia Glassley. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, it really helps the channel out. Well, that wraps things up for this one, guys. Be sure to smash that like button or I'll smash you. Make sure you're subscribed and the bell icon's clicked, and you'll be hearing from me again very soon. Until then, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.